Thank you, James. Yeah, I've actually been to this event as an attendee since the one that was about Nordic stuff. Who was there? A couple of years ago, yeah. And since then, I've been a regular attendee, enjoyed this event a lot. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about better living through packaging. And I'm going to give you a story of a life of packaging, which obviously includes branding, because I've spent the last 15 to 18 years of my life working on packaging of some sort or other. Lately, I work at Percona, where pretty much all we do is package stuff. We send things upstream. We make 100% open source software. And if you're in the MySQL or MongoDB world, you probably have benefited from some of the software as well. I was also on the founding team of MariaDB Server for a fairly long time. I left when they made a licensing change to one of the key pieces of infrastructure software out there. Before that, I used to work at Sun via acquisition of MySQL. Before that, I was at MySQL. And I've also got some experience packaging stuff around the Fedora project. I was on the very first FESCO, as well as OpenOffice.org. So it's just a lot of packaging over maybe 18 years, 17 years now, actually. The Oxford English Dictionary defines packaging either as materials used to wrap or protect goods. I understand earlier we had jokes and talks about where are the crates. I don't see them. But it's also about packaging and presenting things in an advantageous way, which is exactly kind of what software packaging is all about. How many of you read Monocle? Not many, I'm surprised. Well, you could pay 80 quid for this bespoke version that comes with a navy-colored box to store and protect your book. It's of no real use, but you'll pay 40 quid more just for a box. And presumably people buy this. I once read a book called The Luxury Alchemist, published by Assoulin, and they also said that people buy things that are packaged well. So in retail, there is a reason why you go out and buy a Chanel or a Louis Vuitton versus Hermes, maybe. And if I had more time, I would have gone to a grocery store today morning, except I actually landed today morning from Malaysia. And I like to drink this tea called Kuzmi tea. You can get this, they have one store in Marylebone High Street. But then you ask yourself, what is the difference between this tea and the variety of teas you get at Waitrose? Kuzmi tea, anybody here drink Kuzmi tea? Nope. Kuzmi tea comes with a story of packaging. They're Russian loose leaf packaged teas, packaged in France, with a 100-year history. And stories help with packaging. It may have some enhanced taste for some of the teas, but by and large, most of them probably don't differ from the regular teas you see in the grocery store. So OpenOffice.org. I started working on OpenOffice.org around 2000, when they actually made it an open source project. It used something known as CVS. So I'm sure a lot of you here use Git. No? People still use CVS here? RCS, Yeah, so OpenOffice used CVS with these things known as child workspaces for you to actually make changes to child workspaces because it's not a distributed version control system. OpenOffice.org had over 80 modules. It actually still does, and it took, back then, close to 12 hours to build and run a test suite. It's a very long time to make a change and then wait for it. So, obviously, what Sun had acquired from Star Systems wasn't good enough for Linux distribution. So then came along OO Build, started by Michael Meeks out of Novell and SUSE. And the idea there was to split it into packages for Linux distributions to make it easy for distributions like Red Hat and SUSE to adopt it. And when it was time to fork, i.e. when Oracle decided it was time to end the life of OpenOffice.org, it was extremely easy to make LibreOffice Because there was already an efficient packaging system available. All Linux distributions were already using it. All they had to do now was plug in Mac builds as well as Windows builds. And if you think Windows is insignificant, you're extremely incorrect, because distribution is important and many, many people use Windows. This audience is probably self-selecting with Linux and Mac mostly, I'm going to guess. As a speaker earlier said, don't go to OSCON with a Windows laptop. They don't know how to deal with it. But the rest of the world actually do use Windows, and if you want LibreOffice to be used, you've got to make sure Windows exists. So OpenOffice.org and the fork that LibreOffice came along exists largely because there was a good packaging system out there. Why is Red Hat a $2 billion company? Of course, they hire great people. They make great products. But a lot of what they do is also highly efficient packaging of multiple components. And they all appeal generally to different audiences as well. So, this particular theme started with Ian Murdoch, and he was one of the people behind Debs. I'm personally an RPM fan more than Debs, but there's no reason to have a Deb versus RPM war. There's so many others today, IPS, if you use a Mac, you've got Homebrew, and so forth. And distributions exist for multiple reasons, multiple audiences, different desktops. There was a GNOME versus KDE versus XFCE war and so forth. But more or less, it all is an amalgamation of packages. And how well you support those packages defines if you actually make a commercial distribution or not. So with Fedora, the idea was, it started with a core and extras, but now it's basically all one. And you'd end up having a tried and tested version of packages that will get snapshotted into RHEL, and you provide great support and services. And Red Hat isn't the only company doing this. Canonical, based here in the UK as well, they've taken Ubuntu to make a very successful Debian distribution that probably a lot of people use. And if you are familiar with the OpenStack world, it's most people who deploy OpenStack probably deploy on Ubuntu. Then I can talk to you about MySQL, where I've had probably 15 years of experience working at the company and elsewhere as well. MySQL is defined as the world's most popular open source database. And if you were here today morning, the opening speech by Stephen O'Grady was also targeted with MySQL being more popular than Postgres, even though Postgres may have been more correct in its implementation. MySQL has had a very interesting past. It is now 22 years old, and that software, it's an open source product that has gone from MySQL AB to Sun to Oracle. But it wasn't always open source. MySQL largely only became GPL v2 in 2000. Connectors at that point in time were once LGPL, but they were relicensed to the GPL, and this came along when there was the first round of venture funding. MySQL started life actually selling binaries for Solaris and Windows. And that's because if you could pay for a license, it made sense that you could pay for a binary. But the real distribution really started happening when it became GPL. And of course, when the license changed, it meant getting OEM customers to embed the connectors would mean you get a lot more revenue as well. I think one very important takeaway from MySQL's success is that you need to be where developers are. It took Postgres many, many more years before they made Windows binaries available, easy to use for Windows people. And as much as we may not say positive things about Windows folk, probably 90% of desktops out there are Windows. So you really have to support the Microsoft Windows platform if you're aiming for developer ubiquity. And Microsoft's been doing excellent work with getting Linux-related stuff there as well. So, why did MySQL become so ubiquitous? During the Web 1.0 days, it was everywhere, and MySQL was the M in LAMP. One of the other reasons, probably beyond being able to just work on Windows, was the fact that it was very easy to set up replication. You could have a master and a slave set up in less than 1 minute, and you could have multiple slaves read off that master in probably 2 minutes. So the LAMP stack could grow. Instead of you scaling up, you scaled out. So easy replication might have been an excellent goal to have in 2000, and Postgres had out-of-the-box replication in 2009 or 10. We also had this very famous 5-minute rule, which meant that from the time you downloaded it to installing it to getting started to writing your application, it would take you less than 5 minutes. And this is something that our then CEO, Martin Mikos, used to always go around talking about as well, because we would test it to make sure end users could get started going in under 5 minutes. So this also meant we needed to have sane defaults. Arguably, they may not be sane enough when you have lots of RAM and so forth, but today's defaults are such that you can start them with 512 megs of RAM, because that's what you get in a cloud instance with a small buffer pool and so forth. Of course, this can bite you in negative ways. If you've been following the news lately, MongoDB has come under a lot of flack for having their servers be compromised. MongoDB installs get compromised. And that was largely also because they just had a default. People don't read documentation and they don't enable secure privileges. And the other reason why MySQL was ubiquitous is because we made a connector for every language possible. If you made a connector that was remotely good enough, we'd most likely hire you. And we wanted to ensure you had connectors for every language. So the choice, the ease of use, and the out-of-the-box setup that you're ready to go meant that we would be fairly ubiquitous. But convincing distributions, especially with a license change, was actually quite hard, because distributions were very used to the fact that the connectors were LGPL. They were concerned that if the connector became GPL licensed, this would make the application that linked against it also GPL. So you quickly realize that you cannot manage communities. This is why they say it's like herding cats. Software only gets better with newer releases, and we needed to make a change in the license, a very unpopular change in the license, moving it from LGPL to GPL. So to convince distributions, we made a FOSS license exception, which is still in effect till today, basically stating that if you are a FOSS tool that links against MySQL connector, you have a license exemption that says your software is guaranteed not to have to become open source. And for us, it meant if distributions never shipped the newer releases, it was actually bad. We needed distributions to ship MySQL. We needed it to be everywhere, so it was ubiquitous. How many of you have read The New Kingmakers? Okay, that's not all of you. I suggest most of you probably should go take a look-see. Because this book maybe only came out in 2012, but this is probably true even since open source started becoming mainstream in, say, 2000 or 98. And developers today definitely realize that they can spend money to save time or spend time to save money. MySQL had another secret weapon. If you make software that can be easily used, the other secret weapon is to make sure people depend on your software. WordPress, for example, a year or two ago, said that they power more than 25% of the web. That more or less means that 1/4 of all websites today either have MySQL, Percona server, or MariaDB server running in the back. Make other people depend on your stuff. It was also extremely easily available on web hosting companies, also largely due to ease of management. And all of this was largely thanks to distributions. Today, web hosting companies just pick out what they get from a Linux distribution, and they offer it to you. If it's easy to maintain with something like PHPMyAdmin, they're really happy to offer that to you as well. There were, back then, great products like GForge, which is an open source alternative to SourceForge, but it really lacked adoption due to the fact that it required a Postgres backend back in the day. Today, it should never be a problem, but back then, it was definitely an issue. Why is WordPress popular? How many of you here run WordPress? .org instances. Okay, that's a lot of you. Easy to set up, easy to update, very easy to customize. It has plugins and themes. It's very easy to use software, which is why 1/4 of the websites of this world run it. So MySQL also realized we needed to get more developers. Getting people to depend on the application is important, but open source also means getting people to extend things. And getting developers from companies like Google and Facebook helped tremendously, because when Google says they need something and Facebook says they need something, They keep on adding stuff. Maybe everyone doesn't need what Facebook and Google need, but they generally make software quality better, and it's a bonus for everybody overall. So we created a plugin interface for things like audit, authentication, and also storage engines. Storage engines were big in the MySQL world at one stage because you didn't only want InnoDB and MyISAM, you could have there were probably like 20 to 30 storage engines out there. And we gained inspiration for this from reading one of a very old Tim O'Reilly pieces called The Architecture of Participation. It's a piece he wrote probably in 2004 or 5, well worth reading. It's on the O'Reilly archives. Our aim was to reduce the burden of contributing to the core server. And our core server is not written in a hot language, so I picked up the RedMonk language statistics, and C ranked number 9, and Perl for our test suites ranked number 13. So they are in use, but they're far from being the top 5 popular languages. So it's generally harder than usual for most. MariaDB had very humble beginnings. For us, it was how do we start a branch of the world's most popular open source database? There were already other choices out there. Percona server existed, as well as the immense amount of money that was being pumped into NoSQL and big data. So we themed it. We packaged the story. We all needed an elevator pitch, and this was ours. We were community developed, feature enhanced, and backward compatible. We worked on populism as a theme. We were small, scrappy 20-person startup who had quit Sun to start a database. Oracle was this big behemoth who may swallow MySQL. The narrative wasn't generally very pro-Oracle. Oracle was forced to make a 5-year promise to the European Union to say they would not close source MySQL. I'm happy to say that Oracle has not closed source MySQL. The 5 years have passed, and they've only made MySQL better. When it comes to marketing messages, we needed packaged stories. Isn't that what all good marketing is about? We would say things like, if you're using MySQL, you must hear about MariaDB if we went to an expo hall. We would also say things at one OSCON, save money with MariaDB. Just by talking to us and listening to us about a pitch about MariaDB, we would stamp a note that said save money with MariaDB and would give you a $1 bill. So you're already saving money instantly. It's not a bribe if it's not over $20 or something. We also definitely capitalized on the fact that we're the new M in LAMP. I mean, giving away $1 bills, we spent like $400. It was so cheap compared to like printing stuff. So we were pushing that we were the new M in LAMP. The scrappy thing really worked for us, but we learned a lesson. We can't be a company full of engineers if we don't have salespeople and marketing people and product management. Turns out selling non-recurring engineering is a really hard thing to do if you're just engineers. So we think if the developers are like Lego blocks, the sales and marketing are like the ads and the logos at those Lego stores, and the service and support people like those manuals you get with those Legos that you buy. Lego is a very well-packaged piece of kit that you buy. I'm sure all of you play with Legos, or have played with Legos. So we made MariaDB Corporation by merging it with SkySQL, and we created a foundation to ensure the server would always be open source, not make the same mistake again. SkySQL obviously ended up becoming MariaDB Corporation because it was hard to build a brand around just a services company. And of course, again, stories and branding became part of the package. And if you're ever thinking of naming an IT company with Sky in it, don't. BSkyB will hate you, and they will make sure you know that you should rename your company. So MariaDB Server. For us, distributions were always the key. First as a choice, but better as a default. So drop-in compatible worked for LibreOffice because OpenOffice went into disarray. Not quite similar in the MySQL world where there are 3 active, 1 branch, 1 fork, and one mainstream. So make it easy for package maintainers. You get a build engineer on your team who's familiar with DEBs, RPMs, build systems, versions of GCC, and so forth. This really does make a difference. Also, what happens when you're no longer backwards compatible or drop-in replacement? Anybody here use Emacs, Xemacs? Xemacs more or less fell into disarray when more of these features ended up going into Emacs as a default. And Xemacs is kind of like no more. Maybe it'll come back. But the worst thing is that what happens when your users notice that your branch or fork is no longer compatible. This becomes a problem because users don't like friction. Packaging today, distribution is not the only thing that matters. We've got things like Docker, where we can get statistics, juju charms, and so forth. And we really need statistics. If you are a venture-backed company making an open source product, without statistics, it's very hard to continually justify the work you're doing. Even though we know it's important, every month you've got to write an update to your investors, and this is a very important part of it. MariaDB says that there are over 12 million strong users. And if you believe in phone home data, it's notoriously unreliable. You would only suggest that we had over 12,000 users. Packaging within platforms. Amazon, RDS, great platform. Huge bonus when you're available there as well. Rackspace Cloud also as well. WordPress AMIs with Amazon Lightsail. Most of them are actually Bitnami images from what I gather. And Amazon learns quickly because they see the MySQL pain points their users face, and then they build Aurora as another engine for MySQL so that things are fixed out of the box for you. It may not be open source, but it will solve your problem immediately. And at Percona, we are largely a company that packages stuff. We like upstream stuff. And we've got this new tool called Percona Monitoring and Management, where we just take the best of breed open source that we ourselves don't necessarily build but contribute to. We've taken Prometheus as a time series database, Console, Grafana to make all those pretty dashboards, Orchestrator to maintain topology of your replicas in a visual format, and Orchestrator being developed at places like Booking.com, Etsy, and so forth. And then we also take statistics from a middleware tool called Proxy SQL. And you can check out the demo, or you can install it in Docker with one click. And our focus is 100% ease of use and deployment. So we're taking the best of breed of open source, packaging it, having it available for distribution and ease of use. In some way, we'd like to view this as a smaller scale Red Hat mindset. We're not small scale Red Hat, but it's the mindset that we'd like to adapt. A lot of people say they want to be the next Red Hat, but they always have this not invented here syndrome problem without realizing that it's all about packaging efficiently. So in conclusion, paradigms change. Distribution definitely evolves. You definitely want to touch your entire community, which is not just Linux users, Mac users, it's probably Windows users as well. Packaging really matters, and we definitely always trade a lot for convenience. I mean, I'm here talking to you about open source software, and I'm using a Mac myself, even though a lot of what I do is SSH windows into other machines. Why do I use a Mac? Because it sleeps and wakes up reliably, connects to Wi-Fi reliably, and it displays reliably. I'm annoyed with Mac OS, but I've traded openness for convenience. And keep that in mind when it's time for you to make software. Because a lot of people, when they have 60 database packages to choose from, they will choose what is most easy for them to get going. With that, I'd like to say thank you for listening.